So in traditional filmmaking, focus control is usually manual, but as a solo shooter or content creator, there's a lot to juggle between framing, storytelling, movement, all while making sure your subject stays sharp and in focus. And if you're filming yourself, that's just another layer of things to manage. So having a reliable autofocus and actually knowing how to use it removes one variable from the process, so you can shift your focus back to being creative and focus on storytelling. So let's break down the key autofocus settings for video on the Nikon Z6III and how it can give you more control and flexibility the next time you shoot. There isn't just one, but 3 autofocus modes on the Nikon Z6III, and I'm gonna focus on the 2 that I like to use in this video. You've got AFF, which you're probably gonna use most of the time, and then you've got AFC. Based on the kind of shot you're going for though, that's what's gonna dictate which mode you should select. Now, when it comes to the 2 primary autofocus modes for video, the main difference is that AFC will work to focus when you tap the shutter, and AFF will focus full-time, automatically, on its own, like a traditional autofocus system. So the reason I love to use the continuous autofocus mode is because this shot right here, I wanted to have her in focus as she galloped out. But as she got closer, I wanted her to kind of fade out of focus. And by using AFC and shooting handheld, I had my finger on the shutter and the autofocus system picked her up and followed her the entire time. But once she hit the point where I wanted her to fade out slowly, all I did was release the shutter. I was able to get a really crisp, beautiful in-focus shot. And as she ran out of the frame, the focus slowly drifted out. AFC is a great option where if you want to have some control over the focus instead of messing with the focus ring, you can just adjust when and where you're focusing by tapping on the shutter button and triggering the autofocus system. All right, so now that I've got my camera on a gimbal, I'm leaving it on autofocus full-time, so I don't have to tap the shutter and I can focus on camera movement and composition and framing. So the basic function of the AFF or autofocus full-time system is to find your subject and track it at all times, or to make sure that the most prominent part of the scene is always in focus. When it comes to autofocus on your subject, both of these modes have the option to locate and track your subject's eye, which means that the Z6III is not only going to pick up your subject, but it's going to recognize the subject's eye to make sure that the most expressive part and important part is in focus. Depending on what you're shooting and how planned out your shots are, you may want the camera to look at the entire scene and select what to focus on, or you may want to get a lot more precise. This is where area modes can take your autofocus to another level, and it's the next layer to the Z6III autofocus system. This is where you tell the camera where to focus and how to track your subject within the frame and in what parts of the frame you want it to be in focus. The main area modes on the Nikon Z6III are, first is the large area mode, which is gonna be a large box in the center of the frame, and you can move it around where you need it, and it's only gonna take into account that area when it's trying to find the subject to focus on. There's also the small area autofocus mode, and this is basically reducing the focus area even smaller than the large area, so the camera's only going to focus on that part of the frame. This will basically factor out everything else except that one little area. And then to take it one step further, there are custom area modes that allow you to create your own focus zone and shape within the frame. And finally, my favorite mode within the autofocus system is the auto area mode and subject tracking. In a scenario where I have a horseback rider moving through a field and I'm focused on composition, camera movement, manning the gimbal, I can trust that whenever my rider is going to come into the frame, the Z6III will latch onto her and follow her. For one more layer of precision, the touchscreen tracking gives me the ability to simply tap on my subject on the screen to focus. All right, so I'm on autofocus full-time, and I am going to now do the touchscreen tracking. And I really want to get a tight B-roll shot of her hands with the reins. And to make sure that the focus doesn't move around, what I'm going to do is I have it set to touchscreen. So I'll actually just tap her hands, and what it's going to do is the autofocus is going to lock onto her hands, and then it's going to track that as long as it's within the frame. All right, so now let's talk about another layer of getting even more custom with the autofocus system. So with the Z6III, you have the ability to customize how sensitive or sticky the tracking system is. So you have control over how well the system is actually gonna stay locked onto your subject, or if it's gonna jump to another subject pretty easily if you're using an area mode where there might be multiple subjects. If you ever find that your autofocus jumps around too much, this is a great feature that's pretty much gonna help you avoid that, because if you have it set to a high setting, once it selects a subject, it's gonna stay stuck on that subject for probably the entire scene unless things just get crazy. Another custom feature, and it's one of my favorites, is when I'm shooting solo, is the ability to adjust how fast or slow the camera will adjust focus when it actually does shift. In my opinion, there's nothing better than a beautiful manual focus pull or having a subject enter and exit the frame without the focus jumping all over super quick. When you're shooting by yourself, this can be a big challenge, obviously, because you can't totally control the autofocus. I wasn't sure how fast or slow my horseback rider was gonna go, so I had the focus shift set pretty high to make sure that the moment she stepped into frame that I picked up focus on her. But then on the flip side, in some of the barn scenes, I slowed it down to give a much less jarring feel. Which leads me to another feature on the Z6III that is really helpful as a solo shooter, and that is autofocus when subject is not detected. This setting is going to be where the camera will continue scanning for your subject instead of jumping to a new focus point. I have it set to autofocus when subject's not detected, and I also have it on auto tracking with priority. Hi, buddy. Priority focus for a human. So we're gonna see how it picks her up. With a digital autofocus system, we all know it can sometimes look super jarring when the system loses a subject, refocuses, and then comes back to the subject to refocus. But with this feature, it'll hold focus for where the subject was while continuously scanning to find it again. And then last but not least, if you still decide you wanna use manual focus, the Z6III actually has focus peaking built into the camera. This is where when you're in manual mode, a color of your choice is gonna appear over the part of the image that's in focus. So as you move the focus ring, you'll see that color shift. So you'll be able to know exactly and precisely what is in focus in your image on the camera monitor itself. You don't need an extra monitor or anything like that. So if you want to check out the short film I created using some of the clips from this video and to see what the Z6III is capable of, or if you just want to check out the Nikon Z6III, the links are in the description below. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one.